Nice to have you along with us on WMMB on a Tuesday morning, and in that 8 o'clock hour of Tuesdays, Dave Bowman, who's been with us throughout the show from Silverdale, Washington, is always bringing us Dave Does History. We're in the early stages of a series called Liberty 250 as we march toward next year's July 4th celebration, the 250th anniversary of this country. And we're talking the things that lead up to that. Dave's going to do that with acts that were intolerable. Before we let you get started, Dave, apparently we had an act that was intolerable last week on the part of the Canadian government with a digital services tax for American companies. And Trump says, okay, we're done. We'll tell you next week what your tariffs are going to be. And before the weekend was over, Canada says, we give up. It's kind of like the Stanley Cup finals. We're not going to win this. So we're going to negotiate. And they're back to the negotiating table. Yet that tax was, as I recall, in the same range or smaller than the taxes that were upsetting the colonials before they started the revolution.
It's not the tax, it's the principle.
Yep, exactly.
That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah,
we talked a few weeks ago about the Cobra effect. Remember that? And
yeah.
The British didn't learn nothing from the Cobra effect, and if they had, they
we're going to pay you a bounty. We're going to breed cobras.
Right. You'd think history would repeat itself. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but it does rhyme. In 1497, Cornwall, which is if you're looking at a map of England, Cornwall is that little tail of England over there on the left-hand side below Wales. It's part of England, but in 1497, it really wasn't part of England. It was, for all practical purposes, a colony. It was a place that had been essentially conquered by England, but even in that conquering, England was smart enough back then to say, okay, we've conquered you, but we need your tin, we need your skills, so we're going to let you run yourself, and you just, be a part of us. Hooray. And this was a great deal for the Cornwallians. I guess they call them Cornish. But
they have hens, I understand.
Yes, game hens. This was going great until Henry VII got it in his head that he needed to fight a war against Scotland. And so in 1497, he told all of his domains, including Cornwall, guess what? You're going to pay a tax, not a big tax, but a tax for me so that I can go fight Scotland. Now, Cornwall had no beef with Scotland. In fact, Cornwall is literally as far away from Scotland as you can get and still be in Great Britain. They had no beef with the Scottish. They had no reason to support this war, and they didn't. And they told Henry VII, well, no, in so many words, only they said it in basically Welsh, we're not paying your tax because we don't want that. You don't speak our language. The tax was levied by royal ministers who didn't speak the Cornish language. They didn't understand the Cornish life, and they completely ignored the rules that Cornwall had been operating under and the independence with which they had been functioning. So the Cornish decided, you know what, this shall not stand. And about 15,000 of them said, let's march to London and explain this to Henry that he's wrong.
Mm.
Well, it didn't work out quite that way. There was a battle just outside of London. The the Cornish were defeated. Their leaders were executed, and the rebellion was crushed. But the story didn't end there. In the aftermath of all this, Henry VII, he was smarter than George III in some ways. Instead of tightening his grip on Cornwall, he decided to, well, maybe I was wrong, and he eased off. He ended his tax. He ended the royal decrees because he realized that if he did all that stuff, it wouldn't bring Cornwall closer to the crown. It would push them further away, and they might rebel again. So he stepped back, allowed them to keep their traditions, their local governments. He did all of those kinds of things, and it turned rebellion. It kept rebellion from turning into revolution. Now, if we fast forward 300 years, Boston is not Cornwall. Parliament is not Henry VII, but the parallels are hard to miss. Here is another distant government imposing taxes and policies without consent. Here we have people protesting, not necessarily with violence at first, but with petitions, with speeches, and eventually, yes, with destruction of property. And here, too, the Crown responds with force. Unlike Henry VII, Parliament doesn't see the danger in overreach. It refuses to recognize that coercion breaks down resistance. Instead of taking a breath, they will double down. And so in 1774, came to America the Intolerable Acts.
Renewal by Anderson, bringing you this hour of Bill Mick Live. We continue Dave Does History in just 60 seconds. So England deciding we're going to crack down on these colonies and we're not going to let up, and they start bringing it, Dave.
Yeah, just kind of a quick recap. We've gone through the Boston Massacre. We've gone through the Boston Tea Party. And England has had enough of this deal with Boston. The Massachusetts people are a problem. And there is a belief in Parliament and a general belief in England that it's Massachusetts. It's not America. It's Massachusetts. That's the problem. And so if we just crack down on Massachusetts, maybe this will help. So in 1774, Parliament presents us with 4 acts. Now, they will refer to these as by their name, 4 acts. They are somewhat occasionally called the coercive acts. They're designed to coerce Massachusetts into behaving properly. And of course, here in the United States, what will become the United States, we refer to them as the Intolerable Acts because these are intolerable, Bill. These are no good. The 4 acts are the Boston Port Act. The idea here is we're going to close the port of Boston. No trade, no food, no business. And the theory here is that if we do this, Boston will be starved into submission and will surrender. Just by some foreshadowing here, you'll notice that Boston did not surrender.
Right.
Okay, so we already know that one's not going to work. The Massachusetts Government Act. This is to basically dissolve the governments in Massachusetts. The colonial government is dissolved. The town governments all across Massachusetts. Now remember, that's Massachusetts and Maine, what will become Maine at this point.
Okay.
All Massachusetts. All the town councils are dissolved. All the local institutions are dissolved. Town meetings are outlawed. You can have 1 town meeting a year. And the idea here is that if they can't organize, well, they won't be discussing these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
At meetings. Some days you get up and you wonder, are the British really that stupid? But it was a different era. Thirdly, they passed what is called the Administration of Justice Act. And what this means is British officials who commit acts that result in a trial cannot be tried locally in Boston. They have to be taken to either Canada or back to England to be tried. George Washington himself will refer to this as, quote, the Murder Act, meaning that British officials can essentially walk out in the street, murder an American, and get away with it because they won't be tried here. They'll be sent back to England or to Canada where they're less likely to be convicted of anything.
Okay.
So there's that. Then you've got this Quartering Act. Now, this is the second time that the British have implemented a Quartering Act, and this one does not go as well as the last one did. The last one was at least tolerable. This one is intolerable. Soldiers are housed amongst the civilians, and although they are not necessarily housed in your house, they are taking over these public buildings, particularly town halls and the likes of which that have been shut down. So we're telling you, you can't have your town meeting. Oh, and we're putting our soldiers in your town hall to make sure that you don't have no meetings. Seem provocative? Well, it certainly did to the Colonials.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt.
Oddly enough, it's this final act. It's called the Quebec Act. Is the one that really fuels fire. This is not a punishment, but it is seen as a provocative Catholic authoritarian threat to the colonials. Remember that most of the colonials, particularly in New England, do not like Roman Catholics. Quebec is full of French Roman Catholics. And the British allow them, remember that proclamation line of 1763? The British say to them, don't pay any attention to that, you go where you want. And this is seen as an attempt to overthrow the faith of North America. And this is a huge problem to the colonials, and it's probably one of the bigger things that we never talk about is the Quebec Act. The 4 acts, the Intolerable Acts, come to America. Britain thought that they were putting out the fire, but it's more of a fuse.
And we're back with more of it in moments on WMMB.
Our weekly dive into history. Dave Bowman joins us on Bill Mick Live.
Renewal by Anderson, bringing you the hour. Nice to have you along on 92.7 FM WMMB. You can follow us on Instagram at WMMB Radio. We are talking about intolerable acts. Dave was just listing those, and I don't know that I'd ever heard of the Quebec Act, Dave, so you are imparting knowledge, my friend.
Most Americans have never heard of that because it doesn't seem to play. Again, we like our history red, white, and blue. We don't like it gray.
Right.
And the Quebec Act is one of those things that, on the surface, from the British standpoint, it actually makes sense. It essentially gives the French Canadians, who they've conquered in the war, in the 7 Years' War, more freedoms and more acceptance in the empire. And it actually benefits Britain quite well. You notice Canada never revolts.
Right.
At least not till the 1970s anyway. But there is a distinct feeling in the colonies, the 13 American colonies, that this is a Catholic attempt. There are actually accusations that George III is a secret Roman Catholic. And this is played up big in America. This is in the colonies. There's a huge anti-Catholic bias here that we never talk about, and we don't have a lot of time to get into today, but you need to understand that that's an undercurrent of this whole thing. And it's used as part of the propaganda that motivates people. If we don't throw off the king, he's going to force us to become Catholics again. I mean, Charles tried it, right? So maybe we need to cut this guy's head off, he said queeringly. So Massachusetts gets hit with these 4 acts. And the idea here is that Massachusetts is either going to starve or submit. And the idea from Britain's viewpoint is this makes sense because this is what you do with rebellious colonies, right? And it's almost like nobody in Parliament has ever heard of Cornwall. I know they know because there's statues of it, and there's all kinds of monuments to the event, and there's all kinds of reminders about it. But for some reason, it's like the Cobra problem. They just haven't learned nothing. And at the end of the day, they seem to have forgotten common sense. They've seemed to have forgotten, it's the line from Star Wars. The more you tighten your fists, the more systems will slip through your fingers.
Sure.
Same kind of thing here. Boston is surprised, as are the British, that they begin to receive aid, food, arms, anything you can name, from Nova Scotia in Canada all the way south to Georgia. Everybody is sending stuff to Boston. Here, you need this, you need blankets, you need food, you need firewood, you need wax, you need whatever. And in the process of all this, begin to form, not just in Boston, not just in Massachusetts, but all around the country, a thing called a Committee of Correspondence. Now, this is a name that sounds fanciful to us. What is a Committee of Correspondence? Is this just a bunch of people sitting around writing letters? Not really. In the 18th century, the 1700s, the word correspondence has a deeper inflection, a deeper meaning to it. It's more of I want you to think of a Committee of Correspondence as the internet today. It's that kind of communication.
Where like minds are gathering.
like minds are gathering to plan, to fund, to get anything and everything you could possibly need. An app
There you go.
to do all the things that you will need to accomplish your civil disobedience is what these committees of correspondence are formed for. And again, the British are going to be shocked by this because it's going to work.
So what they were trying to suppress, the British end up sparking this fire of coming together to resist all this.
It really does. I mean, it's a lesson not learned, not remembered from Cornwall, but it sees all kinds of things happening. In Massachusetts, you have the Solemn League formed. Now, this borrows right out of English history again, and this is a league that is going to make this a very religious argument. Again, it goes to the Quebec Act and the Catholic thing. But they also, it's a grassroots-driven movement, and its intent is to boycott British goods, not just in Boston, because they can't import anything in Boston, but New York, Philadelphia, Savannah, Charleston, all across the continent, the American continent, we're going to boycott British goods. So these things are there. In Virginia, George Washington, remember him? George Washington, the hero really of the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, he finally finds his rebellious voice, as it were. And he actually gets involved with something called the Fairfax Resolves. Now, the Fairfax Resolves are essentially the state of Virginia saying, you know what? We are going to enter the political storm as well, and we are going to make it very clear, and we are going to really express our position that we need to be independent. It's not just a New England thing. It's not just, up there. This is who we are as a united continent. And this is actually going to these Fairfax Resolves that Washington puts together. They condemn the Intolerable Acts. They assert their colonial rights as Englishmen. They call for the British boycott of goods. They do something else. They propose the formation of Congress, the Continental Congress. And it's these Fairfax Resolves then that, are going to lead to that. But it's the Suffolk Resolves up in Massachusetts that really, it's Massachusetts because they're pretty ticked off as it is.
Yeah.
It's up in Suffolk that they actually produce their Suffolk Resolves, which are going to say, we refuse to abide by these 4 acts. We're not going to follow them. And more importantly, we are going to raise an army. We're done talking. We're through negotiating. We are through with all that nonsense. We are going to raise a militia, an army, and we are going to be prepared to fight for our freedoms. Now remember, Boston is, of course, where all the British troops are, the ones that are not on the frontier anyway. And here's Boston, here's Massachusetts saying, hey, guess what, General Gage? We're done with these, and we're going to raise an army. And that army, much like happened in 1497, when the Cornwallians, the Cornish, marched on London. I like Cornwallians better. March on London. We're going to, if we have to, march on Boston. Well, that's going to lead to some problems, as you can imagine. At the end of the day, the Suffolk, the Intolerable Acts are completely and utterly rejected by all of the colonies. England's attempt to isolate Boston, to isolate Massachusetts, has completely and utterly backfired. They didn't learn the lesson of Henry VII, and boy, is it going to cost them.
And we find out how when we continue in moments.
Call Bill now, 321-768-1240.
Renewal by Anderson, bringing you this hour of the show with Dave Bowman doing Dave Does History. This weekend on the Florida Roundtable, Dave brings us American Scripture, our founding documents for the 4th of July holiday weekend. So we're looking forward to that as we work our way up to that fateful date a year from this 4th of July with this Liberty 250 series. And Dave, England has stirred up the colonists, and they are banding together and saying enough is enough.
Yeah, it's almost like they just didn't learn anything from the past. I mean, I don't. A lot of the American Revolution is driven by what I would call ego and missteps. There were many people at the time who said, you know, if you just let them do their own thing, just like Cornwall, if you just let them do their own thing, they'll be fine. But you had too many egos and too many.
Washington's a loyalist here, and he's a member of the British forces, right?
Well, not anymore. As of right now, he's on our side. So Franklin, of course, we talked about him last week, is going through his thing. It's a real mess. And in September of 1774, September 5th, those Fairfax resolves come to pass, and delegates begin to arrive in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. Now, among them are George Washington, John Adams, John Jay, Patrick Henry, and John Dickinson. Dickinson being one of those guys that should be more prominent to us, but for whatever reason, there isn't. Georgia doesn't send delegates, although they kind of do. Georgia is one of those weird places, and we could talk about Georgia for hours. This issue with Georgia and the Indian tribes in Florida will continue even into the constitutional era. There are many people who believe that the only reason Georgia ratifies the Constitution is because they want help from the other 13 states, the other 12 states, fighting the Indians down in Georgia, down in Florida. But even now, in 1774, Georgia is still kind of hoping that maybe Britain will help them fight the Indians down in Florida. So they're a little hesitant, but the rest of the states are already really on board with this. And as the Congress begins to meet, the First Continental Congress, they are united in this idea that we have to stand together. It's this unite or die mentality has finally come to pass. Now, there are people there that still hope for reconciliation with Britain. John Dickinson is a great example of this. He's one of the last people to the revolution, but he's one of the people that's going to lead it when it finally comes. And he's going to have a huge impact later on, constitutionally speaking. The Congress issues a declaration of rights and grievances. Now, this is where we're almost to the point where we're going to start. We've almost reached the point where we can start talking about those grievances that we're going to list in the Declaration of Independence. These declarations of rights and grievances are going to complain to the king, but not necessarily about the king. In fact, the grievances at this point are still more with Parliament, because it's Parliament that's, usurping our rights.
Well, a plea to the king for relief or something here.
Redress of grievances.
Yeah.
But amongst these Declaration of Rights, the Congress of the United States, the First Continental Congress, makes sure that included in these Declaration of Rights are these: life, liberty, and property. These things are unalienable, and we believe in them to the point where we are willing to form militias and armies, and if we can't get what we want, well, we're going to fight for it. The Continental Association comes out of this. This is an idea that the colonies will unite in economic resistance to Britain, hit Britain where it hurts. By this point, the economic issues have kind of shifted a little bit. While Britain doesn't necessarily rely on the colonies, there are some things that are important here, one of which is shipbuilding. By 1774, a third of English shipbuilding is coming from the colonies because we have forests, and that's getting bigger by the moment. Think about what that means. It's 1774. In 25 years, England is going to be involved in the Napoleonic Wars, Battle of Trafalgar, these kinds of things. Those are ships, many of which are going to be built in America. What if they don't have that anymore? English goods are being imported to America. English merchants rely on America because they're selling us stuff, fashions, all kinds of spices and this sort of thing. And if we boycott all that stuff, it's going to hurt the average merchant in London. And if you start messing with the middle class in Britain, that's not going to go well. They're going to argue with me. Wait a minute. Why are you doing that? Why are you making these people mad at us? We didn't do it. You did. This Continental Association unites the colonies. It's not just Massachusetts anymore. Now it is the 13 united colonies. And they are united in this economic resistance to Britain. There is an idea that maybe we should, form a type of union that is part of the Commonwealth. It's kind of like Canada, but that plan falls apart pretty quick. There is no longer any middle ground. In the Congress, in the First Continental Congress, you are either pro-independence or you are pro-Britain. And the pro-Britain side is rapidly fading. And by May 10th, 1775, the First Continental Congress of the United States of America will issue not quite a proclamation, not quite a threat, but in essence, they say if Britain's not going to listen to us, if Parliament's not going to listen to us, we're done. And May 10th, 1775 should be one of those dates where you start looking at it and going, okay, what happens in June of 1775? Anybody remember? Bunker Hill.
There you go.
The colonies have been shouting over each other for months, but now they've begun to unite and speak with a single voice. And it's that voice that says enough is enough. We're done with this. We're done with your disrespect. We're done with your mistreatment. We're done with your intolerable acts, which are violating our rights as Englishmen. And Parliament continues to say, no, we're supreme. We decide what's good for you. We decide what you get. And we decide, because we're supreme, what gets taxed, what doesn't get taxed, and who's going to answer. And just like 300 years earlier in Cornwall, there's this mindset that says it's time to march. It's time to make sure that if they're not going to listen to us, well, we're going to explain it to them in terms that they can understand. And unlike Cornwall, the Americans have already shown the British that we are a force to be reckoned with. We're not just some rabble-rousing mob marching to London. We're not even going to march on London. We just want you out of here. And the time has come. And as all of this stuff begins to percolate, and all this stuff begins to cycle, and all this stuff begins to rub its wrong ways, there comes the question, is there still time to back off or not? The colonies begin to gather that militia that I talked about. And part of that militia stores arms. They store cannons, powder, rounds, at a little place called Concord, Massachusetts. And between Boston and Concord is another little town called Lexington. And the First Continental Congress has said, we've had enough. Start getting ready.
And we pick it up in just 1 minute on Bill Mick Live. You want more at Dave Does History? Head to the show page at BillMick.com today. Its title is Media, Money, and Migrants. There's a link to Dave Does History right there, along with Dave's other work. So, Dave, the colonies have had enough, and it sounds like enough is enough.
The colonies have always had this obnoxious, loud, independent streak in them, very American, as it were. I mean, if you go around the world today and people ask you to describe Americans, they're going to say we're loud and obnoxious. We're proud. They argued over land. They argued over taxes. They argued over trade. They even argued over religion. I mean, we just kind of scratched the surface of the Quebec Act and the underlying issues there. But keep in mind, we've got one of the colonies, Maryland, is a Catholic colony. I mean, that's what it's there for. Mm-hmm. For most of their existence, for most of the time that they've been here, these 13 colonies have been, like I said, 13 voices shouting over each other. But in Philadelphia, Carpenter's Hall, not Independence Hall, by the way, they find harmony, not agreement on every issue, not unity in every detail, but they find harmony, which is one of my favorite words in the English language, and because of the way it implies a motion of things. That voice, that harmonic voice in 1774, in May of 1774, says, we're done. We've tried. We've tried to work with you, but you've done nothing to work with us. And like the Cornish, we've had enough. Now, is Parliament going to try to crush us, or are they going to say, like Henry VII, maybe it's better to let them do their own thing? Maybe they'd be. If Parliament had come back in 1774 and said, 1775, and said, you know what, you're right. You guys run yourself just like Cornwall did, and everything will be fine. Form your own governments, do your own thing. Just, still be loyal to the crown. It'd be a different world today.
Well, and they would have been willing, right?
They would have been willing to do it.
Could have avoided all of that.
The real question is, what would you have done if you were in there? Would you have stayed with Boston, or played it safe? Did the colonies overact? Did they wake up? I know this. Next week, the British are going to march to Concord to try to take away those guns and powder. The shot's going to be heard around the world.
And that's it for Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live on this Tuesday morning. Thank you for being part of it. Renewal by Anderson made our hour possible. Tomorrow, a wide open Wednesday. We give you one day a week to talk whatever it is you like. Well, that's going to be tomorrow, and we'll see what you're thinking when we get together at 6 a.m. right here on WMMB. Pick up our podcast, top of the page at BillMick.com, and Dave's on the iHeartRadio app. Dave, thank you. We'll talk to you next week, sir.
See you then.